A husband comes home at night to his wife and 2 little kids. Just a few hours later, that same husband wipes out his entire family. When the police ask him over the phone, "Can you check if anyone has a pulse?" all he says is, "I'm not going back inside." This is the story of a perfect husband who looked completely normal on the outside, but turned out to be something else entirely underneath. Hi guys, I'm Adam, and you're watching Who Was, where we take you deep into the world's most shocking, most gut-wrenching true crime cases. Today's story comes from a small, quiet town in Italy, where life was going on completely normally, until one man reduced his entire world to ashes. This is the story of Carlo Lisi and his wife, Maria Cristina, and the night that got written into the history of the town of Montevisconti in permanent black ink. If this is your first time on our channel, make sure to subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell icon, because what's coming up is going to leave you stunned. It was barely dawn on Saturday, June 14th, 2014, when the silence of Montevisconti, a small, peaceful town in Italy, was shattered by an agonized scream. Neighbors peered out of their windows and saw a man, 31-year-old Carlo Lisi, standing outside his house, screaming, begging for help. His face had gone pale with fear. He was mumbling something incoherent, repeating over and over that someone should call the police. People slowly started coming out of their homes toward him, no one quite understanding what on earth had happened. When the neighbors tried to calm Carlo down, he told them a story chilling enough to raise the hair on anyone's neck. He said that while he'd been out watching the Italy versus England football match with his friends at a sports bar, some stranger had broken into his house. When he came back, he found his home ransacked, and then he found the bodies of his 38-year-old wife, Maria Cristina, his 5-year-old daughter, and his 1.5-year-old son. There was a strange kind of hollowness in his voice as he told this, as if he were describing a dream, not reality. The neighbors immediately called the police and an ambulance, but while they waited for help to arrive, the emergency operator asked Carlo whether he could check if any family member had a pulse, or start CPR if there were any signs of life. His answer was shocking. Carlo screamed that he wasn't going to set foot inside that house again, that he couldn't even touch them. That in itself was strange. He referred to his wife and children as bodies before their deaths had even been confirmed. When the police and medical team arrived and confirmed all 3 deaths, Carlo's reaction was even stranger. He tried to cry, but his face only twisted into odd expressions. His eyes stayed completely dry, his face almost blank, as if he were performing a role he hadn't quite rehearsed. He couldn't get the sequence of his own actions straight, and his story kept changing. But he claimed he had recorded the moment he discovered the bodies on his phone's camera. He believed this footage would prove his innocence. In reality, that very video would go on to become the biggest piece of evidence against him. This was the start of a case that seemed like it would be solved almost instantly, but the secrets buried inside it would shake the entire world. The robbery story Carlo kept repeating was dismissed within just a few hours of the investigation. As the police gathered more evidence from the crime scene and questioned Carlo further, that suspicion hardened into certainty that behind all this lay a calculated, premeditated mind. The question was, whose mind was it, and what could possibly justify a decision this horrifying? The horror of that night was only the beginning. The real story starts much further back, with the lives of 2 people whose paths crossed one day, and whose love ended in a conclusion so dark it's hard to even think about. But to understand how Carlo Lisi became the man he was, we have to start his story from the very beginning, from his childhood, and from the woman whose husband he became. Maria Cristina Omez, later known as Maria Cristina Lisi, was born on September 17, 1975, in the small northern Italian town of Pavia. She was the eldest child in her family, and from a young age she showed a distinct kind of leadership and independence. She was a girl who marched to her own beat. She never needed anyone else's approval. There was a natural leadership in her personality that showed up everywhere, whether it was schoolwork, her performances in the drama club, or any everyday responsibility. Maria Cristina had already carved out her own place by the time she finished school. She had plenty of friends, thanks to her excellent organizational skills and her ability to bring people together. Once she finished her schooling, she got into a prestigious university in Milan and moved out of her parents' house to start living her own life. But despite that independence, she always stayed in touch with her family. They knew they could always count on their eldest daughter. At just 19, while she was still a university student, Maria Cristina took a job at a major Italian insurance company's branch in Visconti. Her hard work and the respect she carried herself with quickly won over her superiors and colleagues, and her career started moving fast. After graduation, she had plenty of opportunities to move to bigger cities, but she chose to stay close to home, in the countryside. By this point, she'd already gotten a promotion and become a leading specialist in the field of civil insurance. Despite her career success, Maria Cristina never gave up one passion from her childhood: theater. She spent her free time in rehearsals and stage performances, especially musical productions, because she had a powerful voice and an excellent ear for music. In Visconti, she'd become fairly well known. People recognized her on the street. But amid this successful run in career and passion, her personal life wasn't nearly as smooth. She had plenty of suitors, a few brief romances, but most of the men she met struck her as superficial and unreliable. People not suited for a serious relationship or a family life. Maria Cristina believed that one day she'd find her true love and that she'd find her happiness. She was a woman who worked on herself, loved her work, and had the courage to turn her dreams into reality. No one had any idea that this very wish, the wish for true love and a trustworthy home, would one day lead her to the man who would turn out to be the greatest danger of her life. But the man Maria Cristina was about to meet had a dark story of his own. Let's take a look at the environment Carlo Lisi grew up in, and how the thing inside him that would eventually prove so horrifying first took root. Carlo Lisi was born in the fall of 1982 in the small Italian town of Casarano, the elder of two sons. The atmosphere in his home was strict from the very beginning. His father was a traditional, hard-nosed man who never once treated his children with any gentleness. Carlo's younger brother quickly became the parents' favorite. He got the love, the protection, while Carlo, as the eldest, was burdened with endless expectations. All his father wanted was unquestioning obedience, excellent grades, and success at everything. From childhood, Carlo kept trying to meet his father's expectations, always doing exactly what he was told. He did well in school, played volleyball, a sport his father had chosen for him, even though Carlo's heart was in football, and he never once argued with his father, in whose house only one law applied: his own. It was easy to make his father angry, and when angry, the man became frightening, so Carlo learned never to challenge him. By his teenage years, Carlo had become anxious and withdrawn. He wanted to do something of his own, but he was afraid of his father's rage. His inner doubts and insecurities affected his friendships too. He had almost no friends at school, was seen as a boring nerd, was openly bullied, and couldn't even defend himself, because his father had already crushed his self-confidence and smothered any desire to assert himself. Over time, Carlo learned to adapt. He learned to avoid conflict, to blend into the crowd, and to appear outwardly polite and good-natured to everyone, even people he secretly despised. It seemed as if Carlo had lost his emotions altogether, or maybe he'd never really had them. He'd laugh along with others, show up at moments of grief, but his inner reaction always stayed shallow, because he never actually felt those emotions. People who knew Carlo personally would later recall how little empathy he had. He was cold and indifferent to other people's pain, no matter how close those people were to him. After finishing school, Carlo enrolled in the economics program his father had chosen, even though he had no interest in economics or numbers, but his opinion was never asked. He'd become accustomed to acting against his own interests, just so he could live up to everyone else's expectations. Carlo was good-looking and knew exactly how to use it. His youthful sports activities and gym habit made him even more attractive, With a dazzling smile and a fit build, people praised his looks, and this only deepened the roots of his self-obsession and narcissism. Starting brief flings with women came easily to Carlo, but staying in any serious long-term relationship was beyond him. First, he wanted to avoid every responsibility. Second, he had no interest in long-term plans. He simply drifted along with the moment. And third, his partners would quickly realize he was empty inside, that he had no real attachment, so it was usually they who ended things first. Even after finishing university, Carlo kept living with his parents, showing no intention of starting an independent life of his own, let alone a family. Up to this point, Carlo was a troubled, suppressed young man, haunted by the need to meet his family's expectations. But fate was about to lead him to a theater stage, where he'd meet the woman who would change his entire life. Carlo first saw Maria Cristina on the stage of a musical play, where she was captivating everyone with her charismatic presence and incredible voice. Carlo fell for her in that very moment, but he didn't have the courage to approach her once the show ended. A few weeks later, fate played its hand when mutual friends formally introduced them. At the time, Carlo was only 23, while Maria Cristina had already turned 30. The age gap was significant, but the two quickly began a romantic relationship. Maria Cristina, who had until then poured all her focus into her career, suddenly found herself feeling a new longing to start a family, to have children. Carlo was handsome, career-driven, and seemed intelligent. Maria Cristina saw his hesitation, dependency, selfishness, and emotional coldness as flaws that could be fixed over time. She took the reins of the relationship, and Carlo simply followed her lead, quietly. Within a few months, Maria Cristina introduced Carlo to her family. But Maria Cristina's parents weren't happy with her choice. They saw Carlo as an immature man, and Maria Cristina's mother went so far as to call him a child in a man's body. They believed their daughter needed a more mature, stronger partner, someone who could be a real support, not this young, careless man. Maria Cristina disagreed and, as always, followed her own heart. On the other hand, Carlo's parents were thrilled with his choice. To them, Maria Cristina seemed like a mature, sensible, self-sufficient woman, someone who could take care of herself and also support their indecisive, somewhat irresponsible son. The head of the household, Carlo's father, was especially pleased. He was convinced Carlo had finally made the right decision. About a year into dating, the couple moved in together and began planning their wedding. Carlo stayed quiet as always, obeying his fiancée, never arguing, avoiding domestic conflicts. Maria Cristina made every decision, and Carlo silently went along with it, an arrangement that suited Maria Cristina just fine, confident that a long, happy life awaited them. But the night before their wedding, Carlo revealed his true nature for the first time, an incident that very nearly ended the engagement. What was this incident that shook the foundation of their relationship right before the wedding? And why, in the end, despite knowing everything, did Maria Cristina give Carlo another chance? Let's find out in the next chapter. Before the wedding, Carlo's friends threw him a bachelor party at a popular nightclub in Milan. Drinks were flowing, everyone was laughing and having a great time when a group of women joined the party. One of them showed particular interest in the groom-to-be and did her best to charm him. His drunk friends egged him on, telling him a brief fling with a stranger would be the perfect way to say goodbye to his single life. Without thinking much, Carlo went off to a hotel with the woman, where they spent a passionate night together. The next morning, shockingly, Carlo confessed his love to this casual lover and promised to leave his fiancée for her. That same day, he told Maria Cristina everything, that he'd fallen for someone else and no longer wanted the wedding. Maria Cristina took the news with dignity. She packed her things and decided to move back to her parents' house temporarily while she looked for her own place. But when Carlo's father found out that his son had broken off the engagement with Maria Cristina on his own, he was furious. He declared he didn't want to see his heir again until he apologized to his bride-to-be and convinced her to marry him after all. Once again, Carlo bowed to his father's will. He bought a huge bouquet of flowers and headed to the Omes family home. Maria Cristina's parents were against him. They'd already disliked this strange young man even before the news of his infidelity and the broken engagement, and now their dislike only deepened. But the final decision was Maria Cristina's to make. After some thought, she decided to forgive her fiancé and give him another chance. Somewhere in Maria Cristina's heart, she believed love would fix everything, that her maturity and good judgment would make up for Carlo's shortcomings. But this was the very decision that would demand such a horrifying price down the line. No one knew that this second chance was actually the first step toward a life whose ending would be this dark. The wedding happened, a home was built, and on the surface, everything seemed fine. But behind the curtain, Carlo's real life had a very different story to tell. The wedding went ahead as planned, and with money gifted by relatives, the couple bought their own home in Mota Visconti. In the beginning, their married life seemed quite happy. Both held good positions with solid salaries, enough not just for necessities, but for travel and entertainment too. In 2009, their first child, a daughter named Giulia, was born. And in 2013, Maria Cristina gave birth to a son, Gabriele. To the outside world, this was a happy, loving family. Carlo appeared to do everything to keep his wife happy, but it wasn't out of deep love or respect, only to avoid conflict. Maria Cristina was content with this life, unaware that her husband was living an entirely different life outside the home. In Milan, where Carlo commuted daily for work, his entire personality shifted. He frequently struck up new relationships with women in cafes, shopping centers, or on the street. A handsome, well-dressed man with an expensive car, he almost always got his interest reciprocated. But these relationships would end after just a few dates. Carlo felt a particular kind of control and power in these short-term relationships, deciding when the next meeting would happen and when to leave his current catch behind. At home, Maria Cristina held the reins, and Carlo simply followed her lead. But over time, rumors of his behavior started reaching Maria Cristina. Every time she confronted him, Carlo flatly denied it, calling it all lies, an attempt to smear his reputation. In 2013, shortly after their second child was born, Carlo seriously considered leaving his family for one of his mistresses, to the point where he told his wife about his intentions. Maria Cristina countered with solid arguments. She particularly emphasized how devastated Carlo's parents would be. Carlo had no response to her reasoning and was forced to stay put. These were the years when no one on the outside ever imagined what was happening inside this seemingly happy family. Maria Cristina stayed busy with her work, her children, her passion for theater, unaware that her husband was a man wearing a mask. Inside, Carlo's already shallow emotional core kept hollowing out further, and as the months passed, a new, far more dangerous thought began to take shape in his mind. But at the start of 2014, a new face was about to enter Carlo's life, and this time, his thinking would head down a road with no way back. In early 2014, a new female employee, young and attractive, joined Carlo's workplace. Carlo fell for her at first sight and found it impossible to think of anyone else. He tried everything to get her attention: small gifts, compliments, repeated invitations to go out. But she had made it clear she wanted nothing to do with a married man with 2 children. Carlo ignored her rejection and had no intention of giving up. Around this time, Carlo started blaming his family for his unhappiness. He convinced himself that his wife and children were obstacles standing in the way of his happiness. He told himself he'd never truly been happy in his marriage or in life at all. But with this coworker, he believed he could have the perfect relationship, if only he were free of his marriage and his responsibilities as a father. The more he dwelled on this thought, the darker his thinking became. Carlo brought up divorce again, but his wife once more convinced him it would be a bad decision, and he had no counter-argument. Frustrated, he started searching online for divorce lawyers, but after a few consultations realized he'd have to give up half his assets to Maria Cristina and pay child support too. This outcome was unacceptable to him. This is when he began a kind of research that strips a person of their humanity. He started searching the internet for how to end someone's life quickly, without raising suspicion. Digging through various crime stories, Carlo came across an article about an armed robbery that had happened in Monte Visconti a few years earlier, where the robbers had stabbed the homeowner to death and fled with the loot. A case that remained unsolved to this day. This is where the horrifying plan took shape in Carlo's mind. To recreate a similar robbery scenario, but this time with his wife and children as the victims. This decision didn't happen overnight. For weeks, maybe months, Carlo turned this thought over in his mind until he reached a mental state where he began to see his family purely as obstacles, not as people. His transformation was so quiet that Maria Cristina never had the slightest inkling. She stayed busy with her everyday life, raising her children, believing her husband was the same loving family man he presented to the outside world. The plan was now ready. Only one night remained. The night that would turn out to be the last one for Maria Cristina and her children. The last day of Maria Cristina and her children's lives was Friday, June 13th, 2014. Carlo had the day off, and he spent the whole day with his family, as if it were a secret farewell party. They all went to an amusement park together, then went shopping at the mall, and spent the evening at their favorite local cafe. Carlo made sure as many people as possible saw him with his family that day, and everyone noticed how happy they looked. Back home, the couple put the children to bed upstairs in their rooms and went down to the living room, where they spent time together intimately. This too was part of Carlo's plan. He knew the investigation would establish that he and Maria Cristina had shared a consensual, intimate moment. And who would think that right after that, a man would suddenly take the lives of his wife and children? Maria Cristina knew her husband was going off to watch the football match with his friends, so when she assumed he'd gone to change clothes, she settled herself down in front of the TV in the living room. But Carlo went to the kitchen instead, picked up a large knife, and crept up quietly behind his wife. He struck her on the side of the neck, but Maria Cristina stayed conscious and tried to run. She didn't seem to immediately realize who had attacked her, and when she turned and saw her distraught husband standing there with the knife, she was in shock. Maria Cristina tried to defend herself and managed to knock the knife loose, cutting Carlo's hand in the process. But the difference in strength was too great. Carlo kept up his attack until there were no signs of life left in Maria Cristina. She died without understanding how the person closest to her could do something this horrifying. After that, Carlo went upstairs and slit the throats of his sleeping 5-year-old daughter and 18-month-old son. Experts later concluded that the children likely didn't feel anything and probably never even woke up. Some neighbors heard screams, but assumed the noise died down quickly and didn't call the police. Had they been a little more alert, those innocent children's lives might have been saved. After this horrific act, Carlo clumsily staged a robbery scene, moving a few things around, wiping his fingerprints off the knife, cleaning up the fresh blood on the floor, and then going down to a rarely used basement shower to wash the blood off. But in his haste, he put back on the same underwear that had small blood stains on it, something he didn't even notice at the time. After that, he bandaged his injured hand, changed clothes, and went to a sports bar to watch the football match and drink with his friends, as if nothing had happened. His friends, who later testified in court, couldn't believe that their friend, who'd been sitting there laughing with them, had killed his entire family just a short while before. Toward the end of the match, Carlo sent several messages to his wife's phone, updating her on the score and professing his love, writing that he'd be home soon. He got back home around 3 a.m. that night and began staging a scene that would end up exposing his true, horrifying nature to the world. When Carlo got back home around 3 a.m., he staged the whole discovery of the crime performance, but in doing so, he made several critical mistakes that would later expose the entire story. The first mistake was that he filmed the whole scene on his phone, hoping it would serve as an alibi, that he'd first seen the ransacked house, then his wife's body, and then panicked and run outside. The second and biggest mistake was that he forgot to turn off the camera, which meant footage got recorded that directly contradicted his alibi and his statements. Once the investigation began, Carlo's robbery theory was dismissed within just a few hours. The examination of the crime scene showed that the doors and windows of the house were completely intact, meaning whoever came in had unrestricted access to the house. Nothing of value was missing, even though cash and Maria Cristina's jewelry were sitting out in plain sight. The mess in the house looked staged, items simply knocked over or moved, not searched. Most importantly, no robber would have any logical reason to harm the sleeping children upstairs. The case quickly turned into a deliberate murder investigation, and Carlo became the prime suspect from the start. He immediately began giving inconsistent, contradictory statements and couldn't properly explain the fresh cut on his palm. When he was taken into custody and his clothes were analyzed, experts found tiny blood spatters on them. Carlo claimed the blood must have gotten on him when he tried to save his family, but the marks were so small and located on the back of his clothes that they could only have come from the motion of a knife. The video that Carlo himself had handed over to the authorities clearly showed that he never went near his wife's body, nor went upstairs to the children. Instead, he ran outside immediately and never went back in. Despite this, he claimed he was certain all three had died by knife, something no one could know for sure unless they'd seen it themselves. The blood-stained cloth found in the trash, which the killer had used to clean up, turned out to be the final decisive piece of evidence. After the arrest, Carlo's grief act completely disappeared. He became calm and unconcerned, and as soon as he reached his jail cell, he simply went to sleep. Carlo felt no remorse for his children, none for his wife, yet he kept insisting on his innocence, even though every piece of evidence was against him. His search history was recovered from his seized laptop, which helped investigators understand exactly when Carlo had started planning to wipe out his family. There was no longer any doubt that this was a premeditated crime. But the real motive was still unclear. Once Carlo realized denial was pointless, he finally started telling the truth. And the reason he gave was enough to send chills down the entire world's spine. Once Carlo realized denial was pointless, he finally began confessing, explaining how exactly he'd gotten rid of his loved ones. But the most shocking part was his motive. He said he couldn't simply divorce Maria Cristina because then they'd have to split all their jointly owned property: the house, the cars, the family bank account. On top of that, there was the burden of 2 children he'd have to pay child support for. And all of this, according to Carlo, would get in the way of his happy life with his coworker. That's why he decided to commit this horrifying crime. As he explained all this, Carlo's tone was completely cold and indifferent. No one had any doubt he was a psychopath. But the question that remained was whether he'd been of sound mind. The psychiatric evaluation found that Carlo was fully aware of his actions and understood exactly what he was doing. But he felt no remorse, neither during the crime nor after. That part of empathy that ordinary people have was completely absent in him. In January 2015, Carlo was sentenced to life in prison. He heard the judge's verdict with total indifference, saying only that he'd expected as much. Sometime later, he tried to file an appeal, but withdrew it himself, saying it was pointless. For any normal person, this moment would have been devastating. But for Carlo, it was just another formal step to get through. There was another painful side to this whole tragedy: the death of Carlo's father. Shortly after his son's sentencing, he died of a heart attack. He couldn't accept the fact that he'd raised, with his own hands, a man devoid of remorse and empathy. A real monster. Perhaps all his life he'd tried to steer his son onto the right path through strictness, never realizing that he was leaving a void inside his own child, one that would eventually take on such a horrifying shape. This story isn't just a tale of murder. It also leaves behind a question. Can a person really hide their true nature so well that even the people closest to them never see it coming? Maria Cristina, who had been so sharp and sensible her whole life, never once suspected that the man she chose to spend her life with would one day take her life and the lives of her innocent children. This case became a reminder for Italy that horrifying intentions sometimes hide behind the most loving faces. Now, with Carlo Lisi in prison for life and his father gone too, All that remains are the memories of Maria Cristina, Giulia, and Gabriele, and the question of where such darkness inside a person even comes from. So guys, that was the heartbreaking story of Carlo and Maria Cristina Lisi. A story that makes us think about how skillfully a person can hide their true face, and how sometimes the person closest to you turns out to be the biggest danger of all. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to Who Was, hit that bell icon so you never miss our next stories, and let us know in the comments what you think about this case. I'm Adam. See you in the next true crime story. Take care until then.